coming now, follow my lead. Coming now, follow my lead. I'm in love with the shape of you. We push and pull like a magnet do. Although my heart is falling too. I'm in love with your body. Last night you were in my room, and now my bed sheets smell like you. Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with your body. 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 Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with the shape of when we let the story begin.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's workshop, Reclaiming Your Energy. I am so excited to be putting on this workshop and to have you here and just to be going all of the information that we are going to be going over today. It is so important and so valuable for anyone with chronic issues. And if you were like me many years ago, just didn't have a lot of answers no matter where you went. So let's talk a little bit more about what today is going to include. So our schedule for today, so we are going to start off with a little bit of an introduction. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about me, my background, how I got here, and then we're going to talk about nutrition and digging deep into where we actually want to start when it comes to nutrition. We're going to be going over supporting liver detox pathways, why this is so important, why I talk about it all the time, and then actually how to do this. We'll have a short break if you need to run to the restroom, grab a snack or anything like that. Then we'll be digging into trauma and stress, such a big topic. We'll be doing a live Reiki session, and then we'll be getting into some intuitive messages, and then a little wrap up and answering any questions that you may have. Now, throughout the presentation, if you have questions, put them in the chat as soon as you think of them. Don't let yourself forget them, and I will do my best to answer them along the way. So a little bit more about me and who I am, what I do, how I work. So I'm many things. First and foremost, I'm a nutritional therapy practitioner. So that really means that I'm a holistic nutritionist. I really look to support the body and help the body out from a food first perspective, as opposed to throwing a bunch of supplements at my clients and people I work with. I'm also a functional blood chemistry specialist, meaning that I am trained to run blood work. More importantly, though, I'm trained in how to read and interpret blood work, looking from a very holistic perspective. So I'm not looking at individual values, I'm looking at the whole picture to really try and figure out what is going on inside the body, where does the body need support, and why are we having all of these symptoms that we're having, and what is the body really trying to tell us. I'm also a certified personal trainer. I've been in the fitness industry for many, many years, and I'm more into the functional movement side of things now, more than kind of the traditional personal training side. And then last but not least, I am a Reiki level 2 practitioner. So I am certified in doing Reiki energy healing, and we'll talk more about what that is and why I use it and why I think it's so valuable. So a little bit more about my personal story and how I got here. You'll see on this screen. So there's a picture of my husband and I, who's been a huge supporter and continues to be a major supporter for me. And then my little puppy. I have a 1-year-old small Labradoodle, Ash, and he is such a ball of energy and joy and cuteness. And if you follow me on most social media things, you will see him quite a bit. But my background is I originally got into fitness because I saw massive differences in my own personal mental health. So growing up, I grew up as an only child with a single mom who was also an alcoholic, and I didn't have a lot of other family and resources growing up. So you can imagine, and we'll dig into trauma later, but the trauma and things that I experienced as a small child, which led to severe anxiety, severe depression. I was medicated quite early on as an early teen, along with some other things that can kind of come along with trauma, body image issues, eating disorders, all of these things that came as a response of trauma. And working out and strength training in particular really helped me as a whole. But more importantly, it helps me get off all my medications that I had been on for about 10 years. So all my anti-anxiety meds, all my antidepressants, all these other things that they pile on top of you, I was able to get off everything and survive. I wouldn't say I was doing great, but I was functioning as a result of that. And so that's kind of how I got into the personal training space originally. Started as a personal trainer, group instructor, was very into the bodybuilding community back in the day. And then I was in a car accident, and it was a seemingly minor car accident, but it disrupted my entire body and my entire life and has changed. Obviously at the time I was not excited about it, but it's changed my life for such the better at this point. But I ended up with severe chronic low back pain, all kinds of body aches, chronic gut issues, hormonal imbalances, headaches, chronic fatigue, later, thyroid issues, all kinds of adrenal issues. All the things that I hear all the time from all the people I work with. I also experienced that and tried to find an answer in the traditional Western medicine world with really, really, really no luck. And then moving into even the holistic space with a variety of different functional and holistic practitioners with also very little help. I can't tell you the number of protocols I've got on for gut and SIBO, adrenal protocols that I would end up maybe a little bit better, but not a whole lot better. And it really wasn't until I started taking my own health and into my own hands and started taking different certifications and all of these other things.
I went to one. I'm on a call for one right
that
now.
I finally started feeling better, figured out the root cause, and started to really understand why I was having so many issues, what was really going on with my body, and most importantly, how to start addressing those issues from a root cause perspective, which has led me to a whole world of health and healing and feeling good and energized and in such a better place than I probably could have ever imagined, which is really the reason I'm so passionate about my work and what I do and helping other people, because I've been there. I know how hard it is. I know that you can search everywhere and have no answers. And then I also know how good it can feel on the other side. So that's my big why. And I think it's just valuable for you to hear a little bit more about me so you understand that I very much understand where you are and where you're coming from and a lot of the frustrations that kind of come along with this. So digging in, we're starting with nutrition. So we're going to start with the basics when it comes to nutrition. And the way we're going to talk about this is I'm going to talk about the real basics here, how I start with my clients, some of the things I'm looking for, and I'm going to walk you through examples. And I'm going to talk about some different scenarios depending on what kinds of issues you're dealing with. But by and large, these are generally great recommendations across the board for the average person who has a lot of chronic type issues. So one of the first things that I always do is, among intake forms, I also do a food and mood journal. This is such a valuable resource for me because, one, I'm looking at, yes, I want to know what someone's nutrition is when they're coming to work with me. More importantly, though, it's not just a food journal, it is a food and mood journal. So I'm looking at trends that correspond with, what's going on throughout the day. How are they feeling after meals and after snacks? Do we have energy dips? Like, what is going on? Because this is going to give us a lot of insight into what the body is really trying to tell us so that we understand how to properly support it. Other things I'm looking at, bowel movements. Also, cravings are a really big one. This is really good insight into what's going on. So this is an example of a food and mood journal. This is the one that I personally use in my practice. If you are one of my clients, this will look very familiar to you. But you will get a copy of this so you can fill this out yourself in the follow-up email as well. So looking through an actual example here, you're just going to look at my notes because I can't read the screen. So looking at kind of starting at the top here of this actual example. So if we look at the example, one of the first things I'm looking at is wake up time and then also sleep time. I want to know, generally speaking, on a day-to-day basis about what time someone's waking up, what time they're going to bed, so I can look at how much they're actually usually sleeping. And I always like to get days that they're working, and then also days that someone's off. So I'm looking at these trends of, for people who work Monday through Friday, our schedule is probably going to look a little different Monday through Friday than it does Saturday and Sunday. And those are some really important insights to be on the lookout for and to understand. So then looking down here, I'm looking at meal timings, based on when someone wakes up, how long after are they having their first meal? What does that first meal look like? So in this example, we're eating about 3 hours after we wake up. Depending on the person, that may be okay. For most people, I want someone to eat a little bit sooner than that. Especially if we have blood sugar regulation issues, if we have cortisol issues, a lot of stress, gut issues, we might talk a little bit more about it, but especially blood sugar, hormonal imbalances, and cortisol issues, I'm typically looking for someone to eat sooner than 3 hours, an hour to 2 hours, depending on what their morning looks like. Moving over, we look at breakfast, and there's 4 egg whites, papaya, plum. No water with breakfast, but there's some after. And then most importantly, once again, how are we feeling during this time? So there's reports of being sluggish, tired, irritable, and overwhelmed. So right off the bat, a couple big things. So we're tired and sluggish. So meaning when we wake up and we should be the most alert, our cortisol should be at its highest, we're not feeling that way. So we probably have some cortisol dysregulation, some cortisol issues first thing in the morning. This could also indicate poor sleep. Why are we not sleeping super well? Could this be cortisol issues? Could this be something else? Then we look at irritable and overwhelmed. So these are more mental and emotional conditions kind of in my eyes. So for me in my practice, obviously based on my training, yes, I'm looking at nutrition and symptoms. I'm looking at blood chemistry. I'm looking at their movement. But I also really need to know what their stress level's like and how is someone handling stress. This person, so this is based on a real client with a couple modifications here, but this person has a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. And so a mindfulness practice of some sort is going to be super duper important. So I want to make sure that we talk about that and bring that up. Maybe that's around meals, maybe that's in the morning, maybe that's in the evening, but that's for sure something that we want to talk about, because having, and we'll obviously talk about this later in the trauma and stress, but having a relaxed, safe body is a very important part of the healing process. So that's already kind of going through my mind. We also see kind of under the digestive issues, so some stimulation, some pain in the upper chest, acid reflux, and so heartburn. So then we're thinking the stomach. So do we have a stomach acid issue? Well, there's a lot that goes into stomach acid. It could be stress related. It could be the actual food. It could be low nutrients. Are we missing some of the cofactors of stomach acid? So these are all things just in this one line. all of these things that I'm already thinking about for this person that we're going to want to talk about, we're going to want to address and dig deeper into. So moving down here at lunch. Lunch is about 4.5 hours later. Okay, typically a good time, especially if we have a history of digestive issues, having 4 to 6 hours between meals is usually a good time frame for most people. So we're having nothing crazy, are eating out from leftovers, some rice with chicken. So we're getting some protein, some carbs, we're having water with the meal, and then we feel pretty bad after lunch. So now I'm thinking, is it the food? Is it the water? Is it the stress and anxiety levels? The burping is usually an indication. With this person, it's a stomach acid issue for sure. And so these are all things that are going through my mind. And then if we continue down, now we're waiting 5 hours. This is also typically a little bit of a later dinner, 8:30. So that's also going through my brain, especially if we're going to bed, let's say at 11:30. Do we want a little bit more time and space, especially given the gastrointestinal issues with this person? Do we want some more time and space between dinner and when we're going to bed, especially when they're waking up with acid reflux? So these are all things that we're really thinking about. So dinner, nothing crazy, some raw veggies. That could be an irritation for the gut with a lot of digestive issues. Looking at supplements, what time of the supplements? Well, I think this person in particular, started to have a sore throat. There are supplements we do not want to take at night, such as vitamin D. So this could be a stimulating type supplement. I want to look at the next day. How is this person's sleep that night? Given the fact that we had a later dinner, we probably didn't feel very good after that dinner. And then we also took a stimulating supplement after dinner. So all of these things are super important. We did get a little bit of movement in with the walking. Super great. Love it. Love walking after meals. But then we're having these burps, and then we're also having a lot of cravings. And I'll just tell you, I know this person, obviously, because this is a client of mine. But there's a lot of indications here: stomach acid issues, stress, mental health, nutrient deficiencies, and also a very significant one is blood sugar dysregulation. I don't think it's on this one, but in this original Food and Mood Journal, there was some dizziness, lightheaded, hangry type feelings before eating that is relieved by eating. Super common blood sugar symptom that we have some sort of dysregulation going on. And so this is going to really kind of shape how we put this person's plan together when it comes to nutrition. So let's talk about that a little bit more here. So looking past this, a couple big things that we want to talk about when we talk about how are we going to create this nutrition plan. Well, how many meals do we want to start with? 3, 4, 5, 6? What about snacks? Question I get asked a lot. So generally speaking, if someone has a lot of digestive issues, and if their main concern when they're coming to me is digestive issues, bloating, gas, trouble with bowel movements, heartburn, acid reflux, just abdominal pain, discomfort, I'm typically going to want 3 larger meals with time and space in between. This will allow someone's digestion to get a break as opposed to eating every couple hours, which is really, really exhausting on the body. So I want to make sure that we're giving that person's digestion just a break to kind of relax and calm down, especially with all of these digestive symptoms. Digestion's tough on the body. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of energy. And when we have these symptoms, then we definitely want to make sure that we're giving our body a break at some point. If we're going more frequent meals, this is typically going to be for the person that has blood sugar dysregulation issues. And what do I mean by that? Well, if someone gets really hangry, if you go a couple hours and start getting dizzy or lightheaded, if you don't eat, if you start to if you stand up and start to get woozy and it takes you a second after a couple hours of eating, this is a common blood sugar dysregulation issue. Sudden changes in your blood pressure can also indicate, it can indicate other things, but it can indicate a blood sugar dysregulation issue. So with this person, I'm probably going to do some more meals, spread out. I'll probably start with 4 and see how we go. I still want to give digestion a break. I don't want someone ideally eating every 2 hours unless they feel that's the only way that they feel good. If that's the only way they feel good, I'm totally on board with that. Now, when it comes to snacks, I like to think of snacks as small meals versus a traditional snack. So we almost want to build it the same. And we'll talk more about this in just a few minutes when we talk about how to actually build a meal and what that kind of looks like. Another big thing we are going to spend a lot of time today talking about is prioritizing protein. Man, is protein so important. We will talk about why, all the reasons why in just a few minutes, but we have to prioritize protein every single day, ideally at every single meal. And then last but not least, we want to figure out someone's digestive patterns. Do they feel better with a smaller breakfast versus a bigger breakfast? Well, we want to make that determination. At lunch, are they typically rushing? Well, we want something that's very super easy to digest at that point. So these are all things that we really want to take into consideration. Before we move on, the last thing I really want to talk about is doing less than 3 meals, any sort of fasting. This is something that I typically do not recommend for most of my clients, particularly when first starting out. I'm not sure if there's a single client I can think of who I've ever recommended fasting to right off the bat. Here's the thing. If we have chronic issues, typically we're going to have a lot of internal stress on the body. We could also, like most of us do, have a lot of external stress on our body, in which case depriving our body of nutrients for not only the time that we're asleep, which I do think is valuable, 10 to 14 hours overnight fasting, I think is great. But then also spending another few hours with no nutrients, well, that is an even bigger stressor on the body. My whole goal with working with clients is we're working to reduce that stress on the body. When we don't eat or eat like a very carb heavy breakfast, pancakes, waffles, something that's all carbs and sugar, traditional types of cereal, now we're also putting additional stress on the body. If we also have caffeine on top of that, so caffeine before we eat or because we're skipping that breakfast meal, we're putting additional stress on the body. Caffeine is going to spike your cortisol when it's done on empty. It can also do it afterwards, but the effects when you are on empty, meaning you don't have any food in your system, it's really going to spike your cortisol, which we do not want major spikes in cortisol. We do not want major spikes in your blood sugar. We want everything to be very regulated into its natural state. So hope that helps answer that question. So moving on. So let's talk more about protein. So protein in particular. So why is protein so important? Well, protein contains a ton of amino acids that are the building blocks for the body. It helps repair organs, it helps restore hormones. We get a ton of enzymes that our body cannot produce on its own through protein. Protein is so important. It is also only one of 2 essential nutrients, meaning if we do not get enough protein, we will die. If we do not eat fat, we will also die. If we do not eat carbs, not saying you should, but you can survive at the very least. So protein is an essential nutrient. We have to get it. We have to get it every day. It is also the most under-consumed nutrient across the board. So it is so important that we are prioritizing protein, prioritizing it at every single meal. It also helps build and repair muscle. As we age, we lose muscle, we lose bone density. And so it's so important that we get that protein to help maintain that. Also, general muscle and bone density we want to have. We don't want to be frail and brittle and not be able to do things for ourselves as we age. So, it's so important. It also really helps to regulate blood sugar. If you have blood sugar dysregulation issues, if you have things like PCOS, you are more prone to blood sugar dysregulation issues. One of the simplest and best ways to support natural and normal blood sugar regulation is by eating protein and by starting your meal with protein. If you look at the studies with continuous glucose monitors, I have also done this personally, there is a big difference between most people's blood sugar when they eat protein first and then anything else versus eating something, a veggie, a starch, a fat, and then the protein. So there is a very clear correlation and connection between blood sugar regulation and starting your meal with protein, which is why it's so important. It is also very satiating. Our weight is a big thing that most of my clients come to me and need some help with that. And while we need to address underlying issues, losing weight and being at a comfortable weight is always kind of on our minds and something that we're working towards. And protein is very satiating. One of the big things I always talk to my clients is, start your meal with protein, then try and move on to your veggies, and then eat anything else. If you follow this really simple formula without any restriction, you will be much better off. You will feel better, your weight will be less of an issue. Now, we have to look at underlying root causes, of course, but from a nutrition perspective, this is a great method that's so simple, so easy, and there's no restrictions on this. So going to the next one here, we are going to talk about really how, looking at protein sources in particular, because I do think there is some misconceptions about protein. What is protein? What is not protein? Where should we get it? So overall, animal sources are going to be your overall best option. Now, we're going to certainly talk about if you are vegan and vegetarian, and there are plenty of plant sources, but the easiest things are animal proteins. You are also going to get the most pure protein, meaning protein, you'll get some fat in there with certain types of animal protein, but it's mostly going to be protein. And we'll talk about kind of why this is important in just a few minutes. We also have dairy as an option. We have protein and fat usually, so we're not just a single nutrient. We are protein and fat. And then we also have nuts, seeds, and legumes, which are going to be mostly proteins and carbs. So let's dig into these sources a little bit more here. So looking at animal sources, seafood, we have meat, poultry, eggs. Eggs are a little bit of an exception. There is a good amount of fat in eggs. I think eggs are great and wonderful, but just something to be mindful of. Also keep in mind, and we will talk about this when we talk about building meals, is eggs only have about 6 grams of protein per egg. So if you eat 2 eggs at breakfast, that's only 12 grams of protein, which is not a ton. So we've got some sources here, and then next up, looking at our dairy options. We have the typical dairy, cheese, meat, cheese, milk, cream, all of these things. Be really mindful that with dairy, a lot of people do not tolerate dairy. Lactose intolerant, you could have digestive symptoms just when eating dairy. Dairy is also a really big one that affects the skin. So if you feel fine when you eat dairy, but you have some skin issues, it might be worth doing some sort of short elimination diet to really look to see if some of the skin issues that you're having, this could be acne, this could be eczema, psoriasis, is linked to dairy. Full fat, raw dairy is also going to be the best option. Really over processed dairy, like 1 or 2% milk, not super great if we don't have to go there. And then lastly, we're looking at the nut seeds and legumes, hemp hearts and hemp seeds are better options. Squash and pumpkin seeds, peanuts, kind of. Peanuts can be a really tough one. Peanuts and peanut butter. Peanuts often have a mold issue, which we're not trying to put more toxins into the body as we're trying to get toxins out and really kind of work through this. So really just keep that in mind. And then you can see some of these other ones. We've got lots of options here, but remember, these are not pure protein. These are mostly proteins and carbs. A lot of times the carb intake is higher than that of the protein. So just keep that in mind. So let's talk about really how to build a meal. And so you're going to get a guide here on actually how to build a meal, but we're also going to go through this. And before we do that, we're going to start with hydration real quick, just a quick note. So hydration, super important. And most, I'd say probably at least 60% of the clients that come to me are dehydrated. And it shows up in their blood work, it shows up in signs and symptoms. So hydration is really going to vary person to person, also very much varies on your activity level. So when we do this, we want to start with about half our body weight in ounces per day. So let's say you weigh about 150 pounds. A good rule of thumb to start with is 75 ounces. You might need more, you might not need quite as much. I wouldn't go too much lower though than half your body weight in ounces. If you're doing a lot of activity and things like that, make sure you boost up your water intake. Now, if you are starting from like 20, 30, 40 grams in your or ounces and you have some way to go, start slow. Don't just ramp up automatically. You end up in the bathroom for quite a bit. It will be a lot on your body. General rule of thumb is I say add about 10 ounces of water per week as a good goal. This is going to make it more manageable and also sustainable long term. And this is all about sustainability. So if the other thing to really keep in mind is, so when it comes to hydration, so not only do we need water, and I like to use pure water in this as well, teas, coffees, all of these other things, I don't like to include in just our pure water intake, but we also need to be able to properly absorb our water. And so we need electrolytes to be able to do that. Now, you certainly can use like an electrolyte powder or a blend. LMNT is kind of the one that I generally recommend to people. It's one of the cleanest, I think, out there. There's also a non-flavored option, which I think is way better, but they also have a ton of flavors and it can be a good option. But honestly, the simplest thing is take some Himalayan salt, put a pinch in your water. You shouldn't be able to taste it. It shouldn't change the flavor of your water, but it will make a massive difference in your ability to soak up that water and your body's ability to use that water. Also keep in mind, if you are not eating a lot of processed foods, so you are eating mostly whole foods, which is ideally where we want to be, you are not getting a lot of salt and sodium in your diet. If you also don't eat out a lot, you are not getting a lot of sodium in your diet. Yes, sodium is a major concern when it comes to people who are generally eating mostly processed food, eating out a whole lot. We can end up with a really high sodium level. But for those of us who don't do that, who eat mostly whole foods, we can really end up with some hydration issues from electrolytes themselves. So please just keep that in mind. If you find yourself going to the bathroom every like half an hour, add a pinch of sea salt. It should really, really help. So moving on here. So now let's talk about how to actually build meals. So to start with here, and once again, you're going to get a guide on this, like a couple page guide that's going to be really easy to follow. So when we're starting off with this, we want to start with protein. No surprise. So I was trying to make it suspenseful there, but I don't think it was a huge surprise. So protein, so important. So usually when it comes to lunch and dinner, We'll want about 6 to 12 ounces, and we will be talking about breakfast separately here a little bit. So don't worry if you're like, what do I eat for breakfast? I'll get there, I promise. So when we look at lunch and dinner in particular, here's kind of a couple different options here for you, and you can look with the approximate amounts for a lot of these things. I'm going to talk about this whole pasture raised and organic thing at the end, but you just have some options here. So we want to start with protein, and then we can start looking next at our fruits. So I'm not anti-fruit by any means. I think fruit in moderation is totally fine. About half a cup to 1 cup at breakfast and or a snack, I think is a great option. You can see here, there's obviously tons of different fruits out there, but here are some options here for you. And then moving on to the next one here, we have vegetables. So generally we want like 1+ cups at lunch and dinner. Once again, we can include some at breakfast. I also think that is a great option, but you can see a variety of vegetables here. We want several cups throughout the day. Vegetables are very important. If you have digestive issues, I recommend cooking your vegetables, potentially even over cooking your vegetables to help with the digestive process. Raw veggies can be quite difficult to digest and process. So if you're like, I don't do well with salads, well, there's definitely a reason why. So moving on, and then we have fats, 2 to 4 tablespoons a couple times a day. If you're eating fattier cuts of meat, chicken thighs, turkey thighs, like dark meat turkey, red meat that's a little bit fattier, you don't have to be as concerned about fats, but if you tend to go pretty lean protein, not eating a lot of fats, once again, fats are one of the 2 essential nutrients that we have to have. So it's super important that we get them in. Also have some salad dressing options here as well for you. And sweeteners, these are not something we want to include on a day-to-day basis. This is an as needed special occasion kind of thing. Here are my favorite sweeteners from a more natural and holistic perspective that tend to do a little bit less, I guess damage is probably the right word, but a little bit less destruction, damage, issues with our blood sugar kind of things going on. So these are some great options. Honey is another one that is also really great. That's not on this list, but honey is also very, very great. And then we have starches. So I am a fan of most people incorporating starches into their diet. I am very pro starches and carbs, not to a crazy amount, but typically about half to 1 cup a couple times a day is going to be a good option. Going to help fill you up. There's some good insoluble fiber in a lot of these things. There's a lot of good nutrients in a lot of these types of starches. So I am personally a fan. I also don't want my clients to be hungry and starving. So including starches can be really, really valuable. And then moving on, we have grains. I'm also like, if not an anti-grain person, I think for some people, if we want to do a pretty strict elimination diet, that's certainly something we can talk about. Most of my clients never do an elimination diet, so it is not something I am very proactive with, although I've personally done every elimination diet out there, all the way to carnivore. But it's temporary. It's a temporary solution to these bigger problems. If we address these bigger problems, an elimination diet's not going to do a whole lot. So different grain options, and these are going to be a little bit better grains. I am a fan of gluten-free for most people when possible. I don't think everyone needs to be super strict going gluten-free, but generally I think it can be a good option for most of us, especially when we have inflammatory issues. So moving on, we have just some other pantry staples, and you can have a little bit of these kind of as needed here. And okay, so before we get into the scramble, so we're going to talk about breakfast. So organic and pasture raised. So when it comes to these things, there's a major order of operations. So I want someone to include protein. If it can be organic, pasture raised, all that good stuff, that is amazing and wonderful, and I'm 100% on board. If they can't, I'm still a big fan of just get the protein in. You can do a little bit leaner cuts of protein. That's going to be a little bit of a better option. Once again, it's splitting hairs, but I do think it can be a little bit better option to go a little bit leaner if it's a more traditional type raised animal. Organic, there's a Dirty Dozen Clean 15. Take a look at that list. That's kind of where I go. I don't think we have to be 100%. Once again, I want someone to get protein. I want someone to get veggies. And if it can be the best quality, great. It's more expensive for sure. And especially nowadays with everything going on and prices going up, we do what you can. So let's talk about breakfast. So a couple big breakfast options and ideas. Number one, I love a scramble. This is my personal go-to breakfast. This is really what I do most of the time. So I have a general outline of how I build my scrambles and how I recommend it to clients. So a protein source, and there's tons here, vegan, vegetarian options available. Add in a little bit of a starch, some veggies. And then for me, I like to do, so I do chicken sausage, sweet potatoes, apples. Sometimes if I can get some good bacon, I'll add in some bacon in there. And then I like to add in some spices. It's fall right now, so I'll add in sage and poultry seasoning and some pumpkin spice or allspice. And it makes it so good and super yummy. I make it in bulk too, so I have it for the whole week, and I'm not trying to cook every single morning. Couple other options on here. Eggs are a good option. Once again, eggs only have about 6 grams of protein. So we want a few eggs. Ideally we're trying to get 20 to 30, ideally 25 to 30 grams of protein at breakfast. So 4 eggs is going to get you much closer. That's going to be about 24. You could also do oats, overnight oats, oatmeal. Put some protein powder in there. It's a great option. We'll talk about protein powders. And then leftovers. Breakfast doesn't have to be a traditional breakfast. You can have whatever you want. So leftovers can be a great option for you. And then we also have smoothies. So a lot of people aren't very hungry in the morning or want something that they can make the night before or super quick the morning of. And a smoothie is a great option. So once again, I'm starting with about 20 to 30 grams of protein. We'll go over protein powders in just a sec. Some fruit in there. You can put some greens in there. You can put, and then there's some other stuff you can put in there. You can do water, milk alternative. You can do, raw milk would be personal preference, but milk of your choice and whatever you want. But this is kind of a little guide and how I recommend just kind of building in smoothies here. So protein powders, here are a few of my favorite, both dairy and non-dairy. There's a ton out there. Personal preferences, I've done the research on these from an ingredient perspective in particular. With the non-dairy ones, these ones are tested for heavy metals, and these came out on top of things as to not having heavy metal issues. So just keep that in mind that these are some great options here for you. So moving on. And keep in mind, these are general guidelines to really help you out. I know when you're first starting, this can be really tough and you're like, I don't know what to eat. I don't know how to build a meal or what this looks like. So this is meant as a template and a guide to just help you out here. So use that what it is, and I hope it helps you. And we already talked about the pasture-raised and organic thing. So just keep that in mind. There's certainly an order of operations. Okay. Nutrition is done. Such a big topic. I'm going to grab a quick sip of water before we get into liver detox pathways, because this is also a very big topic. So liver detox pathway support. Let's start by why we have to start here. And this is where I start with 99.99% of any chronic issues that my clients are having. I honestly can't even think of an example of when I haven't started here. So maybe it's 100%, but I don't want to put myself in that hole. So let's start with, what does the liver actually do? So the liver does so much for our body. It is so unappreciated for all of the things it does for us, but it produces bile. So bile breaks down fat in our body. So our liver produces bile, which is then stored in our gallbladder. And then the gallbladder releases it anytime we eat a fat, and our body's like, hey, we've got a fat, release the bile, let's break it down. So you can probably understand that, let's say we don't have a gallbladder anymore, and so our liver wants to produce bile, but it doesn't have any place to store it. And most doctors aren't going to recommend anything to help with this. Well, why do so many people who have gallbladder removal surgery end up with digestive issues? Well, this is a really big one, because we stop being able to properly, or we're having a really hard time breaking down fats. And once again, fats are an essential nutrient. We have to have them every day. Otherwise, we won't survive. So this is why a lot of people who have gallbladder removal surgery end up with a lot of issues. It's the body's natural filtration system. So all of our blood and all of our body goes through our liver. It filters out toxins. It filters out things that shouldn't be there. It just filters out everything. And if our liver is really struggling, we can end up with some issues, with some things that shouldn't be there, that our liver should have enough capacity to bind up and get out of our body, and it may not. It also helps with the breakdown and creation of nutrients. So there are certain nutrients that our body can create if we don't have them. It also does a lot with different processes and the absorption of nutrients and how we do this. And if our liver is overburdened and we can't create some of these nutrients, and maybe we're not getting them or we can't digest them properly, this is a big reason why a lot of us end up with nutrient deficiencies, and sometimes pretty intense nutrient deficiencies. It also does so much to filter out toxins and harmful things like viruses. So once again, it's the body's whole filtration system. So any toxins, anything that's not broken down properly in our gut, anything our immune system doesn't have enough capacity to break down and get out and fight, that all goes through the liver. It also helps to balance out hormones, stress hormones and sex hormones. So let's paint the picture here. So we're being exposed to estrogens, most of us, xenoestrogens, a lot of the time. And then we are chronically stressed, and then we have all of these underlying issues. So there's a lot of external stress and internal stress, plus we're getting exogenous hormones into our body. You better believe that's making a big impact on our liver and just causing a lot of stress and a lot of burden on our liver, and it's just not going to be able to keep up with everything. Something's going to have to give. We can end up with some symptoms of estrogen dominance and toxicity issues and all kinds of things, hormone imbalances, all kinds of stuff. And this is a really, really big issue. It also does a lot with glucose, blood sugar regulation, all that kind of stuff. So if we have blood sugar issues, these big energy crashes, that's a serious issue. And then it also plays a major role in so many other things, and also medications. Any medications, any supplements have to be filtered out and go through our liver to be properly absorbed. So even if we are taking a bunch of supplements to help our body, and I've certainly been in this situation along with so many of my clients. I think the most supplements I was ever on was like 32 or 33 at one time. All of that has to go through my liver. Plus, I already have inflammatory issues, chronic viral issues, heavy metal toxicity, all of these things. Am I really absorbing any of these supplements and nutrients? Probably not, or probably not the way I need to be for them to actually help. So we can throw all these supplements and medications and things out there, but we're not going to be able to properly use them unless our liver has the capacity to do so. So this is why it's so important that we focus on the liver. So moving on. So when it comes to supporting the liver, and I call it detox pathways, which is it really is the liver, and then the kidneys play another really big role. So when it comes to these detox pathways and supporting detox pathways, there's 4 pieces that we need to think about. So we need to think about direct liver and or kidney support, because these are the main organs that are going to be starting this detoxification process. And this is a scientific, there's phases of detoxification our body goes through. I don't have time to get into all of that, nor does I think the average person will want to learn about that, but you can all Google search it, the phases of detox that the body goes through. But this is not some juice cleanse detox kind of thing. This is like clinical detoxification that our body goes through. So liver and kidney support. This is going to help open up. I say it's like a gate. So you have like a gate. And then we're going to start to open this gate. Well, what's going to come through this gate? Toxins and other things that our liver is having a hard time getting out of our body. So we probably want some support and help with binding up those toxins to get them out of our body. So it's really important that we use binders. This is also takes a lot of nutrients. This process is really tough and a big process, especially when we've had a lot of dysfunction. So this is just a big process for our body. So adding in some extra nutrients to specifically support phase 1 and phase 2 of our detoxification can be really, really, really helpful and beneficial. And then on top of that, this is also a very exhausting process. I mean, it just takes a lot of work to be able to do this. So our body needs some extra energy to be able to do this. So I want to give it that energy. So that's a basic overview. So let's get into more specifics of what this actually looks like. So I came up with 2 different options to show you. So if you don't have access to Fullscript, which is a wholesale supplement distributor, you can always send us an email back at the follow-up email we're going to send you to get access to my Fullscript account. It is also linked in all of my social media accounts under supplements/protocols. So you can also go check it out there. If you're in Canada and need access to this, let me know. There is a different one for Canada. There's also a different version for anyone outside of the US and Canada. So let us know. I have access to everything that you would need if you want to go kind of this Fullscript route. I don't use this protocol very often. I almost always use CellCore products. And the reason being is, in my opinion, after doing a ton of research, CellCore has some of the best products, specifically when it comes to liver and detox pathway support. Their binders are unlike any other binders out there. We'll talk about this in just a minute. You will also get a comparison chart of the CellCore binders and how these actually work inside the body and the different things that they do. Super cool, super fascinating. And their products are strong, which it can be too much for some people, but there are certainly ways to be able to do this to manage the body. But I personally, for almost all of my clients, I almost always go the CellCore route. But so let's talk about CellCore first. So CellCore is a practitioner-only service. So you have to be both a practitioner and a practitioner that can run some sort of labs to even get access to this. Because you are part of this webinar, you can get access using this patient code. So you can create an account, but you have to use this patient code. They also have a sister company that is available to the general population called Microformulas. Some of the formulations are quite similar. Some are a little bit different. Generally speaking, they are not quite as strong as the CellCore product brand. Something to keep in mind, but still a really good option, still a great company. So if we're looking at CellCore, I'm always going to start with either Advanced TEDCA, which is a liver support specifically. This is going to be great for bile production, and this is going to be great for the liver overall, but it is very strong. So that is something that we're going to talk about how to determine which supplements you do in just a few minutes. But it's really important that we understand this is a very, very, very strong supplement. We may not be ready for it. Stronger is not always better when it comes to liver and detox pathway support. You can end up with detox symptoms, which you don't want and should not be a massive part of the process. Small part, yes. Massive, no. So the other option I'll do is something called KL support, kidney and liver support. Still strong, but a much gentler approach to supporting our detox pathways. The really good binder is the biotoxin binder. It's a good entry-level binder. Once again, in the email you get after this, we'll have a comparison chart. But biotoxin binder is great for any sort of byproducts from a lot of gut bugs. It's also great for some environmental toxins, some just really general toxins. Ammonia is another really good one that is really helped by biotoxin binder. But that's pretty much where I always start, is with this one. It's a great entry-level binder to get started with. Now, one of the main reasons why I use CellCore binders versus other binders, CellCore binders actually are formulated and have been third-party tested to help the body absorb nutrients versus most other binders deplete nutrients. So biotoxin binder can be taken with or without food, whereas most other binders have to be taken away from food. Otherwise, it's going to not only absorb toxins, it's also going to absorb your nutrients, which is super important because when we already have these detox pathway issues and these chronic issues, we probably are going to end up with some nutrient deficiencies. And then on top of that, if we're trying to support this process and we take a binder that further depletes our nutrients, that's going to leave us in a really tough spot. So we do not want that, which is why I love the binders, the CellCore binders. Next up, we have BCATP. This is going to help support the energy process. Now, this is also formulated between the BCATP and the advanced TEDCA and KL support. These are designed to also support phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification. So with CellCore, a lot of times we are going to start with 3 and then some asterisk other ones, but 3 products versus usually 4 using like a full script account. Now, not a major deal, but you know, if we can get away with 3 supplements versus 4, I'm 100% on board with that. So less money, less burden, less things to remember. So now the other 2 supplements I will sometimes add in is CT Minerals. CT Minerals is a very basic and good trace mineral support. I think it's something like 70 trace minerals in it, so I think it's really great. Helps with energy. It can also be applied topically for a lot of reasons. If you have skin issues, eczema, acne, psoriasis, it can be applied on lotion or directly onto the skin and can help just calm that area down. So I'm a huge fan of it. So I personally take CT Minerals on a daily basis. I don't take a ton of supplements, but it's one that I continue to take and do notice a difference, particularly in my energy levels. So just something to keep in mind. The other thing that we need to think about is we need to be having very, very, very regular bowel movements in this process. 1 to 3 every single day. Every single day, we should be having 1 to 3 bowel movements. And if you are anything like me with a history of constipation, you're like, holy moly, how am I going to get there? That seems outrageous and crazy. I promise it's possible. Your body will thank you. Your energy levels will thank you. Your entire digestive system will thank you for getting this to this point. This whole process, opening up these liver and detox pathways, especially if we have a heavy toxin load exposure, which we'll talk about what that looks like in just a minute, we will probably need something to help with our bowel movements. I love Bowel Mover in particular because it's not a stool softener, something like magnesium citrate, which is it's just a stool softener. That is really the only reason to ever take magnesium citrate. This, on the other hand, is more of a bowel stimulator. So what that means is it's going to actually help to stimulate movement through the colon to move things along, which is the majority of the issue for most people. Now, sometimes we'll add in magnesium citrate if we need a little support with that at first, but usually long term we don't need that. These last two ones are also something that you don't have to take long term. This is kind of an as needed. Like I said, I personally feel the effects of CT minerals. I love it. I take it every day. Bowel Mover I took for quite some time, but it's not something that you should have to be on forever. It is also not addicting, which is great. So moving over into the Fullscript, I have a couple options as well. So I have on my Fullscript page a general outline of 4 of these supplements, one in each category. That's a really basic version. So there's a BioBody TEDCA, which is not as good as the CellCore TEDCA, but it is a version of TEDCA, which is super great and valuable for the liver. So I'm a huge fan of it. Other option is a liver support. This liver support 2 in particular, the 2 is important. There's a big difference between the formulations. So liver support 2 is really good. Looking at binders, so there's a lot of different options. And it really depends on kind of the person where we start. So activated charcoal is a great option. Clay is another good option. Chlorella, another good option. Chlorella, I typically use more for heavy metals than anything else. So usually I'm going to start with the clay or the charcoal. Honestly, I use the clay more than anything else. That's a personal preference. I think people do a little bit better with that. So that's typically where I go. Moving on, we have a couple supplements for general energy support. And then, we have something to support phase 1 and phase 2 of our detox pathways. And then lastly is energy support. So you can kind of take a look at those. And then once again, if we need some bowel support and some bowel movement support, Integrative Therapeutics Motility Activators, a great option. I'm a huge fan of that product. And then magnesium citrate, once again, magnesium citrate, strictly a stool softener. That could help, that may be part of the problem. Is it all of the problem? Usually it's not, in my experience, at least. So I hope that helps give you a little overview of how I kind of, some of the products that I specifically use and how I kind of go about thinking about them. So let's go on to the next one here and talk about building your own custom protocol and some questions that we really need to ask. So if you tend to be sensitive to supplements, to medications, typically we're going to start with something a little bit easier. So we're going to do like kale support. We're going to do the liver nutrients. We want to be really gentle. If you're sensitive, we've got to be sensitive to the body. The last thing we want to do is put so much pressure on the body that it cannot handle this process, because that is not going to help us either. We also, have you had significant symptoms for a year or more? If so, we probably got some significant liver detox pathway dysfunction. It's going to be a lot. It's going to be really intense if we do some of the more intense work. And you can certainly go this route, but be prepared for some detox reactions, fatigue, headaches, migraines, constipation and or loose stool, abdominal discomfort, extra bloating, things that, just start a little sensitive, take an extra month to go through this process. You'll be way better off and your body will once again thank you. Do you have a history of constipation? Once again, we talked about constipation. When you're constipated, you have these toxins, this waste that wants to get out of your body, should go out of your body, but it's sitting in your body. What happens during this process is now we're reabsorbing all of those things that are trying to get out of our body. And that's recirculating through our body. So usually I'm going to recommend, let's go a little bit easier. Let's make sure we have some bowel stimulation support while we're going through this process to make sure that our body can handle it. It's not going to be overwhelmed. We don't want to end up with even worse constipation. I see it all the time. And I've personally been there. It's so uncomfortable. So we do not want that. So these are some things that we just need to think about when it comes to how are we building this detox protocol, what kind of supplements. I also recommend starting low dose of everything. So start with about half the recommended dosage of everything and work your way up. Once again, if you answered yes to any of these questions, if we have some of these patterns, we just need to be really careful, and we just don't want to put too much pressure on the body. So moving on. So once we do liver detox pathway support, this can be anywhere from 1 month to 3 months. I will tell you that I had to do even longer than that, but I had also been through a ton of protocols that did not work and did, I don't want to say more damage, but there was certainly some extra things that were going on in my body as a result of no one looking at some of these underlying root causes and some nutrient deficiencies and overloads that were overlooked as a result of not being properly trained and looking at these things. So keep that in mind, that this can be a lot. We need to spend some time here. Sometimes we need to spend dedicated time, like a month or 2 here by itself. And then maybe we can add in some continual support while we also start working on some next steps. So what do these next steps look like? Well, if we have overgrowth, bacterial related, maybe that's H. pylori, maybe that's SIBO, bacterial overall, maybe it's like fungus and yeast with candida, maybe it's parasites, well, then we can start getting into this process next. Keep in mind, if we do this all at once, we need a pathway for these things to get out of the body. If these pathways are blocked, they have no way to get out of the body, and you are going to end up with killing these things, and then they're going to sit in your body and stay there, and they will 100% come back. If you do it this way, where we have this clear pathway for when we kill these things and get rid of these things, then they have a clear pathway to get out of our body. That is how we address these things long term. When we think about, so SIBO is a super common one where people have chronic SIBO again and again and again. I was also this way. I've done 6 maybe SIBO protocols. And one of the biggest reasons why I kept having to do these protocols is because 1, I had parasites as an underlying issue, which can contribute to SIBO. But 2 is I was so constipated and there was no way for this bacterial to get out of my body. And so every SIBO protocol, I'd feel worse and then I'd feel a little bit better and then it'd come right back. And it wasn't until I supported liver detox pathways that I no longer ever had SIBO issues again. I mean, it's been years. I've never had a SIBO issue come back again after doing this. If we have a toxin issue, we need to spend some real time having some different binders, making sure that we're getting up all of these toxins. So if we have overgrowth, a lot of times we're also going to have a toxin issue. The reason being is toxins are going to cause a lot of dysfunction in the body, which leave it open to be a breeding ground for overgrowth and for all of these things to flourish in our body. It's also a great food source for a lot of gut bugs, parasites in particular. It is super rare that I will see someone who has parasites who also doesn't have a toxin issue. So if we do liver detox pathway support and we're to jump right into parasites without also either simultaneously or ahead of the game, working on addressing these toxins, binding up these toxins and getting them out of the body, Well, we're leaving their food source there. And so parasites and these other gut bugs are very likely to come back because we still have these toxins. So it's so important that we address the toxin thing and make sure we're using different binders, different types of binders, ones that are good for heavy metals, ones that are good for environmental toxins. If we have mold, that's a whole other thing. But we have to make sure we get these toxins out of the body so that we can make sure everything else can be cleared and not come back. So it's really important that we focus on a variety of binders. With mold is a totally different beast. So mold issues, if you've ever lived in an old house or building, somewhere that had water damage, if you've worked or gone to school in somewhere like this, so like spend a decent amount of time in, the chances that you have mold are super, super high. And mold stays in the body. It doesn't go out. It just, especially if it goes systemically through our body, it's going to interrupt our liver detox pathways. It's going to contribute to overgrowth in our body. And mold is tough. I mean, it is tough to get rid of. We have to use a variety of binders. We have to use some pretty strong binders. There's one in particular I use with most of my mold clients called Carboxy from Cellcore. And it is, it's really, really, really strong. I mean, we start with 1/32 of a teaspoon once a day, and work our way up to one teaspoon twice a day. So you can kind of understand like how strong it is, but it's so good at getting mold out of the body. But we have to use a variety of binders, strong binders, to get this mold, to make sure that when we're addressing everything else, none of these other issues come back. Because if you do this the right way, you do it once and you never have to do it again. Going off of that, the last phase of any sort of, killing protocol, binding a toxin protocol, any of these things, is we have to rebuild the body. Yes, we are going to get rid of some of the beneficial and good bacteria in this process. It is a necessary evil. It is fine. Your body will be okay, I promise. As long as we end this whole process by building the gut and the body back up. So this is really the only time I recommend using things like probiotics, prebiotics, and then I like to use something to heal the gut lining just to make sure we're in a good place. L-glutamine, there's some other supplements that have a variety of nutrients to help our body do this. But it's so important that we do this. Once again, from personal experience, this is a hugely missed step of the healing process. And once again, if you only want to do this once and not have to worry about these issues again, you have to rebuild the body. You have to rebuild the gut. It is so, so, so important for so many things. So we have to do this rebuilding protocol a month, maybe 2 months. Some of these other things, as far as the time frame, it depends. It's hard to say. Some of my clients do pretty well with like 1 to 2 months of work with toxins and overgrowth. Some of my clients need like 4 to 6 months of that kind of work. Parasites in particular are real funny, and we have to make sure we get them out of the body, but they can be tricky and it's hard to know. There are some, trends on blood work that we can look at that can help us determine our potential parasite overload. But it's not really until we get into it that we can really understand how big of an issue it really is. So I hope that helps with the liver detox and building a protocol and kind of where to go after this. So we're going to be ready to take a break here very soon. So if anyone has any questions, so if you have any questions, put them in the chat right now. I will be more than happy to answer them. We just covered a lot of material. So please, if you have any questions, put them in the chat, and I will be more than happy to answer them. I want to make sure this is interactive, that if you do have things that come up and you think of, that I can help you out. It's the best that I can. Thoughts on monk fruit? Yeah, so monk fruit is generally a pretty good sweetener. It kind of depends on the person. You know, for me personally, like I'm pretty sensitive to stevia and I don't do great with stevia, but I do super well with monk fruit. So I'm generally a huge fan. If you are using it for like in something or like in coffee or something, it's really strong if you get it by itself. So just be really mindful of that. But yeah, I think monk fruit is a great option overall. Any other questions here before we kind of wrap up and take a quick break? No. Okay, so we are going to take a little bit of a break here. Hold on, there's one other question. So the question is here. I'm just going to read it for anyone. So eating during a workout. Yeah, so definitely record that in your food and mood journal. So eating while working out, just let me cover this in general. So when we're working out is a stressor on the body. Any type of workout out there is a stressor on the body. Maybe an exception of like yin yoga, which is more very meditation, slow stretching, deep breathing, but any other kind of workout is a stressor on the body. And I will say cardio is definitely one, especially when your heart rate's pretty high. Strength training, also a really, really big one. Stress is not bad, but we have to be mindful of our overall stress load. So if we have a lot of chronic issues, so let's say we have a lot of chronic digestive issues, and then we're working out, and that's a stressor, and then we're eating, which can be a stressor if we have all of these digestive issues, I probably wouldn't recommend it. I actually, and this is something I personally implemented many years ago, is I will not eat 2 hours before a workout. I will also not eat for at least an hour after I work out. This gives my body enough time to bring this overall stress level down and to recuperate a little bit, get back into more of a parasympathetic state, which is a relaxed state, which is what we need to be in for optimal digestion. Our digestion is not going to work super well if we are in a stress state. If we think like way back in the day, if we're being chased by an animal, we're probably not going to like stop and eat something. The same thing goes with reproduction. We're probably not going to stop and try and reproduce while we have this imminent threat. Well, our body doesn't really know the difference today between being chased by this predator and all of these chronic stressors that kind of build up in our body. So we just want to limit our overall stress when it comes to digestion. Being in a parasympathetic relaxed state is super important and super, super valuable. So just keep that in mind. I hope that answered the question here a little bit. Oh, working. Well, different story, but that was good to cover because that is important. So if you're working, so once again, we want to be in this like rested, relaxed state while we're eating. And if we're eating quickly, typically we're going to have a digestive reaction. So I know this is not always possible. We want to do our best. Life happens, so I totally get it. I'm not perfect by any means. I eat and work occasionally. I do my best not to, but working while eating, ideally we don't want to. If you can, like take your time, like take a bite, really, really chew your food, put your fork or spoon down, continue working, and then take another bite. That will at least help you with this parasympathetic state and try and relax as much as possible. So I hope I got the question right now. And let me know if that did not answer it at all and if I got the question wrong still. So any other questions here? Okay, So we are pretty much right on track here. So we are going to take a 10-minute break. So right now for me, it is 12:30. So come back at 12:40 or in 10 minutes, whatever 10 minutes is in your time, and go to the bathroom, get a snack, whatever you need, and we'll be in a good place. We'll see you soon.
When we start a conversation, we trust me and trust me, I'll give it a chance. Now my hands stop and the man on the jukebox, and then we start to dance. And now I'm singing like, girl, you know I want your love. Your love was handmade for somebody like me. Come on now, follow my lead. I may be crazy,